All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am Brooks. I'm on the growth team here at RudderStack and excited to bring this technical session to you this afternoon, at least East Coast afternoon. And today, obviously, we'll be talking about data transformation, comparing RudderStack versus Segment, and excited to have Ryan McCrary and Max Werner here to be your guides for the next hour or so. So with that said, I will let them kind of take over from here and do some better introductions, and we will get things moving.
Cool. Well, thanks for having us. Max, thanks for being here. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are?
Yeah, well, I'm Max, and I do CDP consulting. Everything from helping people, plan out their CDP implementations, considering the various buying options, and helping them, go away from spreadsheets. A lot of times. That's what I do.
Cool. And I'm Ryan. I'm a customer success engineer here at RudderStack. So admittedly have much less success with Segment and the like than Max, but have worked with Max on a couple of projects, and we've gotten to do some pretty cool things together. And yeah, we'll share some of that today over the next few minutes. So Max, we'll jump right in. I'm going to refer to Max mostly for the Segment side of things. Like I said, he's got a little more experience on that front. But Max, you want to jump in? We'll go through kind of what Segment functions and protocols are, the way that RudderStack kind of approaches those as transformations, and then we'll go through a couple of use cases of transformations and kind of how those work within RudderStack. And then from there, we'll do just a live demo of a couple of things that Max and I have used in kind of day-to-day data processing to get some stuff done with our transformations. So yeah, so we'll start with the kind of limitations of Segment functions and protocols. Max, you want to take that one?
Yeah, all right. Well, the benefit of being a consultant is I get to play with all the tools. So both on the Rudder side, but also on the Segment side, as well as a couple others. And so today's theme, data transformation. So Segment offers the functionality of basically writing your own source in the form of Segment functions. They, throw you up a webhook URL, and you could just, write some code in there and basically have it flow into Segment from there. There's a couple, sounds great, sounds really great, and it is, but it has some pretty severe limitations. I mean, you're building a large chunk, the first part here, vendor lock-in, you're building a large chunk of your data pipeline inside somebody else's platform, so you're locked to that. There's, the billing pieces you get from various, plans, and depending on what your contract looks like, so and so many, compute hours, of function time. So you could potentially run into overage charges if you use that feature as, like a core piece of your pipeline. And you also have like no control over like the finer configuration details of these functions. I mean, under their hood, they're Lambda, like they're Lambda as a service, right, basically. But you can't fine tune it in terms of like giving it more time to run, more RAM, or upload your own packages or anything like that. So if you want to do something simple, cool. If you need to do a little more complex things, you're running into some problems. The next part is, it kind of flows together with the vendor, but it's the infrastructure that you're getting locked into here if you, build your Segment functions out, because they give you that endpoint URL, which is basically just like fn-segmentapis.com/ and then, hashed value. The problem is like that is both an identifier for your function and the right key that source represents. So if you have some sort of key rotation requirement as part of your cybersecurity policy, that will create a new function URL if you need to rotate that. So if you have that in like a mission critical thing that is set up in like 5 different tools that send data there, have fun updating that all with a new URL without things breaking. Yeah. have not run into that problem at all before. Cough, cough. Yeah, and I mean, like I just mentioned, it's like you can't upload your own packages. It's basically just the version of Node that they provide you with, which, curious enough, also has some missing pieces that normally are part of Node. Most notably, I ran into the issue not too long ago that was the crypto module was missing. So if you want to build like a UUID or something, that is a really handy module to have. Didn't exist in that Node version. And yeah, leading more into the development piece, you're locked into that graphical user interface. It's like there is ways to like programmatically deploy things, but for the most part, you kind of have to, edit and test your things inside that, and have to also make sure that it kind of sends along like events that you kind of have to like listen for live, so you can inspect payloads and stuff. So it's a certain experience.
Sure. Yeah. And still nonetheless allowing you to kind of modify your data as you're routing it in flight. And so, some benefits as well. As far as segment functions as destinations, anything you want to touch on there? Yeah.
So where you basically get an endpoint URL on the source side and you call your identified track calls or whatever inside that function. The destination kind of works the same way, but you kind of just like hook into, those events. So you say like on track, do something, on identified, do something. The idea being here that you can, implement like your own, API connections. If you're like, there's some service that you're working with that has an API, but that, doesn't have a segment connector, you can just say, well, if I get an identify call or a track call that is my subscription started, I call the API endpoint for this system and, switch a flag there so that somebody gets paid, or who knows what. The limitations, I mean, are mostly, of course, the same in terms of like the development experience and what you're limited to. The main focus here on the destination side, if you go one first, was that you're working now or almost always with like external APIs, which means you will need some sort of API key, some secrets. So you have that you need to, again, put into that segment UI. And come back to the whole key rotation thing. Let's say either that API key is invalidated or something you need to change now, like that's you spreading your keys further around from maybe like a centralized key store that you might have. And of course, when you're building your own integrations, the error monitoring is even more important here and is somewhat limited on the segment side.
Sure.
Compared to something like CloudWatch,
Right. Yeah.
And the third piece of transforming data is, of course, like the transformations piece inside protocols and segments. So like they data governance module, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, again, it's a graphical user interface, so you can click things together, which is inherently going to be like always more limited than writing code to transform your data, almost regardless of what that language is. So the transformations feature in protocols, it gives you three options. You can rename an event. You can, edit the properties of a track or identify a group event. So properties are traits, but you can only like rename the key. So, if you have like revenue, you can call it, purchase information or something, but you can't really do anything with the payload itself. Like there's a little bit where you can like serialize like a JSON string, but for the most part, that's it. So if that is your use case, it's great. If that isn't, not your use case, and you maybe need to do a little bit of data cleanup, or even want to do, something as simple as like, like dropping a couple of keys here, you're, well, you can't. And then, of course, the last piece is like kind of part of how segment is built overall, that like instead of connecting one piece to the other, it's always like you're instantiating like a new destination or a new source of the same type. Same thing goes with these transformations. So you might in your transformation library have like 5 transformations that do the exact same thing that are hooked up to like different pieces, which just is not super great for maintainability.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, so I can jump into this and feel free to interrupt me at any point if I miss anything, Max. But kind of to be on the other side of that, what we see as the benefits to RudderStack as a transformation, it isn't just baked into the product, right? It's part of what we do. It's kind of a core tenet. And really the high level idea is that everything that goes through RudderStack, whether it's, a traditional event from an event stream, something from like an ETL cloud extract source, or even kind of our reverse ETL solution, pulling in warehouse as a source, everything gets converted to a JSON, just a JavaScript object, right? And so everything we're going to do is just going to be good old JavaScript. We're just going to be able to operate on that object and do really anything we want to do in JavaScript, whether it's any of the things that Max mentioned, or we can use third-party APIs from within. Really, a lot of extensibility there. So, yeah, and that second point, I mean, these run in real time over your event stream. So these are everything's happening in flight. Again, it's customizable per destination, and even on the connections. So kind of to the point that Max said, we're able to reuse these or allow customers to reuse these on various destinations and just different connections that they might have. And then we have some non-standard connections as well. So, if there's a destination that we don't support in RudderStack, we can use just a traditional kind of webhook destination that we have in conjunction with a transformation to essentially kind of shape that payload into what that downstream API is expecting, and really build a connection based on the combination of a webhook destination and a JavaScript transformation. And then we have recently added some kind of code maintainability stuff with adding function libraries. So we have some shared libraries that we provide for RudderStack. So we have a repo of shared libraries that people can grab and use on their own. And then really anything that you're finding yourself reaching for using over and over again. Max, you mentioned crypto libraries. We have a couple of solutions for that, where as long as there's no external dependencies, we can load a crypto library, call it from within a transformation. Whether we're hashing for downstream tool or trying to generate a UID, we can do those from within. And then the last piece is kind of our kind of mindset here at RudderStack is trying to be API first and as developer friendly as possible. And so being able to, we have these transformations typically managed in a GUI, which, as you mentioned, is not most people's favorite place to manage code. And so adding the ability to upload these transformations via API, and even recently we've added a GitHub action, which we'll go through in a little bit for that, where these transformations can be built, in whatever environment you choose on your own local machine, push to a repo in GitHub, and then test it against an input and output that you can provide. Unless that action passes, they don't get uploaded to the API. So kind of a CI flow for transformations and for the code that they use. Anything else there? Anything?
The library part is super exciting, because like there are these things that you will always want to do, right? There's a certain set of like functions that you will always want to run over your main stream to clean some things up, and we'll go into some examples later. So instead of writing that into every single transformer for every destination that you need, you can just factor that out into like your one kind of clean this payload function, and then just reuse that all over the place.
Yep, exactly. Cool. We'll go through a couple of use cases, and these are some examples that I've pried out of Max and some things that we've used internally in the past here at RudderStack and with some customers that we work with. But this first one is some data cleaning. This is a Max one, as you can tell by his email address being in there. Max, you want to walk through kind of what this was and what you're trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, everyone loves, entering 30 different field mappings in their destination configurations, which is always fun, because, your engineering team implements a trait or a payload part or a property in a certain way, or like say you're getting like sales amount or something, or subscription amount or whatever you get, and the custom field in your Salesforce system needs to be revenue or something, right? You can change that in a transformation super easy just for that destination, and your warehouse or anything else still receives that sales amount piece. So that was actually a purchasing decision on a client of mine's for segment protocols, because they just needed to rename some properties. And like that was like instead of just writing like one line of code, you can just like you had to buy this entire like software suite or an extra module. So much nicer here. And then, yeah, you mentioned the customer email. I mean, I get emails every so often, like newsletters or various things, and I sometimes get them twice or 3 times because when I enter something on my phone and capitalizes the first letter or something like that, I tend to be in some people's systems multiple times, right? Based on just that's obviously the same email address, just a different casing. That's in many systems more than enough to create a second lead, or it's sort of great when you get the sales emails and being like, man, I've been a customer for 3 years. It's all right, it's just like a different casing. So that's, for instance, something that you would be extremely hard pressed, if at all, to achieve in like a segment like protocols piece or something, right? But just as I mentioned before, like these standard cleaning things, just downcase emails. Look if there's an email trait or in your traits or properties, and just lowercase it, right? That way you're immediately eliminating some of these very low hanging data hygiene fruits.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and because these are just JavaScript objects, we can kind of access those however we need, and kind of it allows us, kind of in conjunction with what you mentioned with the data governance piece of some of these maybe fixes that we're thinking of beforehand of as you can see here, Max loves to lowercase every email that he gets, regardless of whether it's already lowercase. But some and that's proactive, but some of it's reactive, right? Where someone on the team is sticking with that sales amount key, even though we've discussed as a team that we're going to go to revenue now. And so it's very easy to, obviously we're going to clean that stuff on the front end, but we can also, kind of begin to generate a mapping in each destination. And even, using that data governance piece to see what people are trying to send through as data, and even kind of guessing at some of that, so it's pretty common on our team. If I'm correcting something like this, for example, the sales amount where it's coming in snake case and I want it camel case, I'll go ahead and fix that. But then I'm also going to add the, sentence case or whatever else it is as well, to kind of go ahead and assume someone's going to throw that in at some point. And I already know that I want it in camel case. So go ahead and, get that where I want to be. So,
because if you ever try and change the API names on a CRM system for something without telling anybody and things break, if you just fix the data in flight, that saves you a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Another piece that we do quite often with these transformations is data enrichment. So I kind of mentioned earlier the ability to, in flight to use a third-party API. So we can, there's multiple use cases for this. This is just an example that we use internally here at RudderStack. But we have a number of customers that kind of what I mentioned is earlier as well with the kind of custom webhook destination. If they're having to get an authorization token from some type of secret store, or generating a JWT, they're able to do that from within the transformation. Reach out, get that, and pass that on in the headers or in the body of that request in real time. And so this is just a and then a lot of customers will actually have internal data stores where they may be enriching or validating contacts before they go to CRM. And so the only limitation with these transformations, and this kind of comes into effect much more with this enrichment piece, is that each one is basically a small little IVM that's going to close up and die when it's done, and so that each one's limited to about 8 megs of memory and 4 seconds of execution time, which hopefully is plenty of time.
And but per event.
Yes, per event. Yep. Yeah, dies each event. At the moment, we don't have any way to cache in between, but that's kind of something that we're looking at as well. And so this is a pretty straightforward one. You can see here for specific identify events, we are basically using Clearbit to look up that email and give our sales team a little head start on, as you can see, some specific traits we're adding in to Salesforce. This is going to Salesforce. The sales team's looking at these and reaching out to leads. So this isn't happening on a large volume of events from our side. This is a pretty low volume source. It's kind of very specific action where someone's looking for a quote or a demo. And so we're able to hit the Clearbit API, look up that person based on the information that Clearbit provides for us, and just really put in some basic geographic info and kind of a company count, employee count for the sales team to kind of begin to sort those leads before they do their own research on them. And probably so they can kind of fight over the ones that have the higher counts. Who knows? I don't know what sales guys do. So just in the data world. But yeah, and so this is a pretty common use case. Yeah, and so just being able to hit a third-party API really opens up a lot of uses for that. Anything up to add on that, Max?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and all these examples, they are like purposefully, like if you look at that code, like very simple pieces, because like that's when I said earlier, it's like code is better than a GUI, right? Because like you can do these things, and then your payload going into like your CRM system, like that when it creates a record, it directly has that enriched information in it, and you don't have to either try and enrich it in the CRM system. I mean, Clearbit is pretty good in terms of integrations with like things like that, but building these like flow steps that is just like, okay, lead comes in, enrich it, then like wait with the lead scoring until you get the enrichment and so on. Like you don't need any of that. It just the record directly comes in with that. So these like very easy to instrument pieces here like save you just a lot of complexity and time and worry, further downstream. So like it's really, really neat stuff.
Yeah, and from a sales perspective, this is a more simple version of what we do, but we actually have, and this kind of gets into other parts that kind of out of the scope of this webinar, but in the warehouse for a lot of these leads, we're calculating a lead score and generating a high value lead table and then piping that back through RudderStack via warehouse action. And so we actually enrich those events a little bit differently as well, since they're coming in after the fact. They're not directly going to affect the creation of leads, but they're just updating the leads with a lead score for certain tools, and then enriching those with additional information as well. So just doing things that that can help the sales team without me having to help the sales team is the idea. This next example, this is another Max example. I'll let you go through this, but this is a pretty very common use case, I would say, for transformations, and kind of has two different kind of features kind of highlighted in it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Ryan mentioned before that it's just, it's a JSON object at the end of the day, that the payload that you're both getting and sending on. So Salesforce is always the fun example where it's very particular about, how the keys in the traits or the identified properties have to be in order for it to accept it. So again, trying to change something on the CRM side is usually difficult, or can create other downstream issues. But you can just maintain this very easy JavaScript object like that I call like Salesforce mapping key, and saying like, this is my event key that comes in. This is what it needs to be for Salesforce, and then you just loop through and move it over. Right. So if you get this like demo object there with sales model and term length, and you run that through that script, boom, you get your proper like sales revenue and contract duration, whatever matches Salesforce, without messing up that event stream for other destinations. If you want to do a little extra math on it, again, you can do that, right? If it's 1337 for a contract of 12 months, that's 111.42 a month. You can directly like do these basic things right in the event stream, and you don't have to make calculated fields in Salesforce or whatever in order to like kind of do that math. It's just, here it is, right? So it saves you, again, downstream steps, especially if you have to work with like salespeople or marketers that don't like to kind of do these things, and they just want to have like their Salesforce dashboard in front of them and go from there, right? Then they don't have to.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, we obviously pick on Salesforce a lot, but there are a lot of APIs that are like this, that are very opinionated of custom fields and even field types. And so one of the benefits that we tout of using something like RudderStack or any kind of CDP or data pipeline is the goal here from an engineering standpoint is to be able to have just a single implementation, right? So we're instrumenting these events one time. We're not having to, every time we add a destination, we're not having to go back and deploy code or test code or mess with production code. And so if we're planning ahead well, if we're thinking through these use cases and building these events how we want them in our code base, they're often going to have a lot more traits than each individual destination needs. So for something like Salesforce, where they're not going to take, if we send all of our custom keys through, A, they're not going to be formatted correctly, which they're going to reject, and B, even if they are, we're sending extra data points that they're going to kick back the event for. And then you have something further like Braze, where Braze will take all of those data points that you send, but you get charged per data point and per change. So the idea is instrumenting the event once, and then we can use these transformations to not only reformat, but to kind of filter, whitelist, whatever you want to say, to get rid of some of those keys that don't need to go to that destination, whether it's for API limitations or just for cost savings.
Intercom is a fun example of that as well, where any trait that you pass in will automatically create a custom fields in Intercom, which you are A, limited on how many you can have, and B, can't delete, which is just a fantastic combo. So being able to just clean that up in your event stream ahead of time, especially when like new things get added, is again, saves you that next support call with your sales rep or your account manager to be like, can you please increase the limit?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about Intercom. And that reminds me of we have another integration. I can't quite remember what it is, but they have a created at field that's actually mutable. So, if you're not able to clean that data in flight and you have a created at key in your event, you're going to continue to update the created at event on a contact, in an email marketing tool. And like you mentioned earlier, that's how you're going to find someone that's been a customer for 3 years getting a sales email. So, so pretty useful to be able to, and a lot of times we don't know these things when we're instrumenting the events initially. These are things that come up as we get add new products or get more in depth in our use of some of these downstream tools. And then the last one before we kind of jump into some demos, this is a pretty common one as well. This is another Max one. There's also an example of this in the repo that's linked here for some sample transformations. But we mentioned scrubbing fields for downstream tools specifically, but as far as privacy and data retention issues, scrubbing PII is pretty important. So you want to talk about on this one, Max?
Yeah, I mean, there's CCPA, GDPR, there's so many privacy laws, and there's only going to be more. So, if you're especially, I'm going to harp on the marketers here, but they come in and be like, here's this cool new machine learning service that we just purchased, and we need to, pipe all our data into that, and they'll build a model for us. It's like, they don't need to, have the PII. They're like, building it off of your event stream, right? So being able to directly remove things, again, in this programmatic, very easy to maintain way of just saying, here's my sets of fields that should be removed from this destination, directly, saves you from having any of that stuff in those systems, right? I mean, you can either remove or you can obfuscate whatever you want, right? So it's just, really, really handy for, kind of preventing problems in the future. It's kind of like the theme of transformations, like preventing problems in the future.
Yeah. Ideally, we're doing these proactively, but a lot of times they become retroactive as well. Cool. Well, we'll jump to a couple examples, and Max, again, feel free to interrupt me with any of these. But this, we've shown some code examples. We haven't really shown. We've referred to these JSON objects, but haven't really shown what an event looks like. But this is the RudderStack UI. This is where a lot of people are primarily modifying, creating, managing these transformations. As well as through the API. But this is the example that I took a snippet from earlier. This is going to have the kind of enrichment piece of it. So again, and this is something I'll jump into as well. This is basically grabbing from a shared library that we have. That, again, this is one of those things, a small one. This is just an example I use, but as Max mentioned, there's oftentimes things that we're going to do on every single destination that we're using, and so we can abstract that stuff out, put them in shared libraries, and then import them, just as you would with any other JavaScript. So this is the one where we're hitting the Clearbit API. So this is, doing just a very minimal amount of enrichment, but reaching out, grabbing that, and then enriching the event. So in this kind of test framework, you'll see that there's an example identify call in here, and you can toggle between all the different calls. You can actually, and we'll show in a second, but this is editable, so you can paste in an actual event from your front end or from your warehouse action, ETL tool, whatever you're using, and see the actual output that you're going to get, actually from one of these transformations. So again, we're going to test on this. You can see that there's a little bit of lag because there is the third-party API there, but on the input we have just these traits that were being sent in, and then you'll notice down here on the output we do have these kind of Clearbit keys that are added, that are formatted, ready to go for Salesforce, and we can release the sales hounds on these guys. So this is again, this is kind of showing just the UI of it and how the test input and output work. In the API, you don't really have direct access to this other than, you know, a local workflow that you may put together. But in the GitHub action, this is exactly basically what you would do for generating those anticipated kind of test results. So you would provide, and we have some, just like we do here in the UI, we have just a random identify call included here. You can use the one that's in the GitHub action, or you can generate your own, and then just like any testing framework, you'll, you know, put your expected output, and then that'll have to pass for that to be, you know, sent to the API. I also mentioned this shared library, so I'll open a new tab and take a look at these. But in the transformations part of RudderStack, we have all these, you know, different transformations. You can see the destinations that are connected to. This is a demo account, so it's not a great indicator of what this would look like. And my naming is, you know, is what it is at an event. But we have these libraries down here. And so this is a simple one that I was importing from. This is really just a way to not have this regex scattered all about all of my different transformations. And then, you know, again, we're filtering out just RudderStack email addresses. And then if someone's using their personal email address with a Rudder test in it, we'll filter that out as well. But this was one thing where I came into the company. Rudder Labs was our old domain. And so I had built this library to do that. I hadn't actually, I lie. I had not built a library. I just had this regex scattered about. And we had some leads making it through from our internal emails. And I realized, oh, shoot, we used to use Rudder Labs as an email address, and we still have some people that are using it for forms. And so by extracting it out into a function like this, easy enough to just go in, add that domain, and then it's, you know, it's already included in all of our other transformations that are pulling that.
Yeah, one use case that I've seen for this kind of like email, especially checking, is from a lead scoring perspective. You have your, you know, like domain names for like all the public email providers, like the, you know, Gmail, Hotmail, Apple Mail, whatever it is. You know, there's still people with Hotmails out there as well.
My mom.
Right? And you can either, I mean, you can do what you want, right? You can filter those out. You can say like, those are never going to be, you know, converting leads, or you score them differently. And again, just keeping that somewhere separately. So, you know, if someone wants to like add a, you know, domain to the, you know, to the list of you know, undesirables, so to speak, they can just go into one spot and add, you know, the new thing in, and it is automatically used everywhere. So like very handy here.
Some sales guy somewhere is screaming at you right now, Max, because of a Hacker News article of some big time, you know, Fortune 500 CEO who uses a Hotmail email address. So, you know, we're missing hot leads right now.
That's why I'm not in sales.
This is an example. This is just a you know, I'll just do like a quick and dirty example, but just kind of showing what we mentioned earlier of just like the kind of data cleaning. You know, this is where is it? This is a product click event. So this is, you know, going to be sentence cased. And so if we say we'd use the data governance API and found that someone was sending that, and we do everything underscored, you know, we could go ahead, and this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, you know, look for that sentence case. And then I'm even going to go ahead and preemptively know that someone out there in our team is snake casing it. And, you know, just a simple event or a simple transformation that's really just, you know, converting that into what we want to see. And this is important because for a number of reasons, but one of the big things, especially with a tool like RudderStack, if you're warehousing this data, specifically these track calls, as you know, Max, we're creating tables for each event key. And so now if someone is sending product clicked as sentence case, now forever, when you're pulling reports in the warehouse, unless you go in and clean this up, you're having to join across both of those tables. Yeah, exactly. So, yep. So, you know, has far-reaching impacts on, you know, individual destinations, but as well as just, you know, the hygiene in your warehouse. We actually had a pretty critical issue recently with a larger customer of ours that was using a third-party browser extension to for some of their like sign-up referrals, and in the RudderStack JavaScript SDK, which is pretty common in this world, we add any UTM parameters that are specifically UTMs underscored to the campaign object. So in this event, it would automatically, under context.campaign, we would already go ahead and parse out those UTM underscores. Well, this browser extension was appending a ton of UTM underscored keys. not a ton, but a handful per event, but they were for some reason they had some kind of weird UUIDs in them. And so what was happening is the way that the warehouse schema works, we add a new column for a new key. So that, when that's coming in, we're fetching the schema, we say like, oh, there's no UTM underscore product in this table. We'll go ahead and add that column. Well, each event had its own unique UTM params. And so eventually they filled up all 2,100 rows in BigQuery. And then they had events failing because they had new UTM params and they couldn't load the events because we're trying to create columns that didn't exist. So they're losing data because of a bad, data hygiene issue where they're literally just, generating tons and tons and tons of keys. And, they're a fintech company. And so we're on a call with their team and they're panicking of whether they don't know what these columns are. And so we're continuing to miss data while they're discussing as a team if we can remove these columns because maybe this is an old campaign, from somewhere back that we need to attribute something to. And so, just things you don't want to deal with. So, that was the fix for that like P0 issue for them was a transformation. We got together with their team, decided that they, could confidently say they weren't using UTM params in this specific case. And so we were able to just delete the whole campaign object from all those events. And then all they had to do was clear a couple of columns and all of a sudden data started flowing through again. So kind of things you don't think of being nightmares.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, fixing that in 5 lines of JavaScript is of course much, much simpler than, the 3 days that you just spent in SQL to fix that table and, backfill data from S3 or try or wherever it's stored,
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Cool. And then the last example, this is one of yours that I'm going to steal, Max. This is specifically for warehouse actions. So when we're talking through most of these events, you come down here and you look at the event structure and it's like, man, this is like a very pretty JSON object, like everything.
Cool. Proper event stream,
Yeah, it's from an event stream. It's from an SDK that's made to do this. So it looks exactly like we would expect. We can traverse all these keys exactly how we want to, and everything is great. But as you may know, and I've got one of your events here, events coming from like an ETL source, like our Cloud Extract, or from reverse ETL from warehouse actions, they're not quite as pretty. We're doing a little bit, and they're coming from our warehouse, so they are going to have some different column names and mappings. And so we've got this not nearly as pretty event here, and we don't want to dump this into a tool as is because it's just not going to work. So.
Yeah, worst case, you just end up with a JSON string in your downstream tool, and that's not help to anybody.
Yeah, then we're back in a situation of having to clean up with a bunch of SQL downstream instead of a couple lines of JavaScript. So
the idea here being in this kind of thing, like you see, there's like 2 keys in there, old truth and new truth, is basically a warehouse action that looks at a table that has between 2 different runtimes, different states of an account or user object, basically. It makes a JSON string out of that. And then the function is basically designed to take this all in and compare it to see if you actually need to do anything downstream with that, right? Because you can, even if you do the string comparison and say, like, is this JSON string the same on the warehouse level, and don't only set the ones that are different, you can still end up with things that you don't need, right? You can, in the new run, there could be things that have been dropped, right? Like an event key, a whole one. And that would make the string different compared to the last run, but it doesn't mean that you need to send that event downstream, which is especially important for, like API rate limited tools. So we basically just built these couple of things that, like rebuilds that JSON string into, a proper payload object, and then just compares the two, right? And sees like, is there actually things that need to be synced or not? And then the output becomes like a much, much nicer, event stream.
Yeah. So more of what our downstream tools are expecting to see. And Max, this correct me if I'm wrong. This may be a kind of simplified version of it, but this was actually at least part of this was something that you built with some of our team to kind of mimic SQL traits within Segment based on warehouse data. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly it, and it's not even simplified. That is that code.
Cool.
Because
Nice.
again, like, what is that? 53 lines of JavaScript.
Yeah.
That solves that problem, right? Because the problem behind it was that we, of course, again, we only want to send changed records to like partially not incur unnecessary rudder events, but also not to hammer downstream APIs with hundreds of thousands of record if only 5,000 have changed and actually need something updated. So this with like a little SQL magic to get these different runtimes together, basically mimics that SQL traits from segment personas, very nicely. Yeah.
And I mean, this is the clearly RudderStack voice speaking, but 53 lines of JavaScript is a little cheaper than SQL traits. So
yeah, I mean, depends how much you charge per JavaScript line. As a consultant, I guess. But yeah, generally speaking, if SQL trait is the only thing that you use segment personas for, hit me up and I'll explain to you how I did this, because this is a lot easier and cheaper.
There we go. Get a little sales time in for Max as well. Cool. Before we move on to the last little bit, anything about transformations or anything you want to walk through or show, Max?
The metadata object is a neat little thing. So you can kind of see from this piece that you get there that event and metadata. Event fairly self-explanatory. It's obviously like your JSON object, but the metadata piece is neat, which like you can do. It tells you everything kind of extra that like the source ID. I mean, you're gonna log it out.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and show it. And then let's do event. I'll do it in properties. Yeah, so this is a good look at kind of what this metadata object is. So as Max mentioned, you get this, as one of the arguments in this transform event. And I guess while we're talking about this, I'll walk through this, but because this is kind of one of those things that I'm a little too close to. It just makes sense because this is what I do every day. But like we said earlier, this is just JavaScript, right? So the only expectation of a transformation is that we have to have a function called transform event, and we have to return. Well, we don't actually have to return an event. We just need to have some type of return. So as you can see, these inputs and outputs are all an array of a single object, and so really, again, as long as we have this transform event, and you can see I think in this one that you have, Max, this is the transform event function, and then we've got additional functions outside of that we can reference from within. So it really is just truly vanilla, just no JavaScript. And so so I kind of glossed over that, but yeah, I mean, as long as there's actually, and this is in our documentation, but there's transform batch as well that you can use to kind of do some sampling or aggregating across events in a batch. Oh man, I'm kind of flying here. And so the second argument is, so the first argument is always going to be that just JSON object, that event. And then the second is an optional, but the metadata object, which is going to give us some kind of freebies that we have. And so you can see I just added those to the properties key. I would show you in the logs, but this is my test account, and I think the logs are broken right now. But we do have a log down here where you can log from within, kind of what you would expect to do with console.log in a browser setting, and kind of log out data there. But it's going to give us the source ID, the destination ID, the message ID, this is something that's going to be unique to each message coming in. And so this is common where you might want to generate multiple events from a single event. And so it's important that we're incrementing this message ID so that if we're generating two events with the same message ID, we can run into deduplication issues. So being able to just basically, in a lot of cases, we do this internally a couple of times where we basically just take message ID and append one to it or something just to make it slightly different. We have the job ID, which is more of an internal reference for us kind of debugging at RudderStack, and then the destination type and the session ID, which you can use to kind of calculate your own sessions. But these are valuable for these source and destination IDs. If we go back and look at our connections page, these are going to be not to be confused with the right key, but these are going to be in the address bar up here. So this is the source ID here. So we can actually use that metadata object to do any kind of operation we want on that event, if it is or is not from a specific source, or is not to a specific destination, which kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about being able to share some of these transformations across connections.
Because like the way, and for some people that might not know, but like the transformations are attached on a sorry, on a destination level. So theoretically, you can of course have multiple like sources flow into the same destination, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the help of that metadata object, you can say it's just like, okay, I want to, for instance, from this like, test source or, the mobile app, whatever, where I get tons of bad signups or something. I want to do specific logic only related to that, source, or, which helps you kind of make a transformation almost on not just the destination level, but on like on a connection level, right? Because you can do these combos of source and destination via that source ID like piece in the metadata.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and so you can see, I mean, here in the UI, you can see the kind of pipelines that go, and then these little purple kind of targets are the actual transformations that are applied. So you can see they do live on the destination, as Max said, and so. Sometimes it may be that, like we mentioned earlier with something like Salesforce, it may be that we're cleaning these custom fields regardless of the source for Salesforce, or it may be, that we're only sending specific events from specific sources, dropping or filtering those as well. So it gives you the power.
Something so that if something comes into Google Analytics from like this one test source, it automatically is called something, prefixed, and that helps you, filter for your own test data.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we actually have some customers that use this, where they are basically collecting and aggregating data on behalf of other customers, and so they may have it may be a consultancy or similar, where they have 6 or 7 customers they're using in a single dashboard, and they're piping that data to their specific Google Analytics, let's say, destinations, and so they can have a number of Google Analytics destinations, because we don't limit how many, how many destinations of a single type you can have in here. And so they can send all those and then use the same transformation to basically, if the source is this, then it is going to this destination. If it's not, filtered out. So you can use it for some kind of unique things like that as well. Yeah, that was a good catch, Max. I didn't even mention the,
it's one of those things, like lots of these transformation types things are, things you don't know you needed until you do, and then it comes in real handy.
Yep. And one thing I'll hit on briefly, I don't know if I have this transformation in here, but this is a little bonus feature that we have. No, it's not in here, but I'll kind of mock one up from scratch. But with a webhook destination, I kind of mentioned earlier that, in a lot of cases, between the combination of a webhook destination and a transformation, you can do a lot of things, right? So you can get that event or that data in the shape that you want. We actually have when you set up a webhook, you can add static headers to the webhook destination from within the UI. But we actually, within a transformation, you can actually access those headers and change them dynamically. So again, if you're reaching out to an API to enrich those, or if you are, for the previous example of, if you're routing data for other customers, you can change some of those headers based on, you could have like a secret mapping or some type of mapping in here for those different URLs, and then, add those as well. And then if it's a Git webhook, or even I think with Post, you can actually append query params from within the transformation as well. So you can access that object dynamically from here. And to that point, our goal is to make the webhook destination as extensible as possible. So if anyone out there watching, Max included, has any thoughts on some other things that would be nice to grab or modify from within the transformation for a webhook destination, we're all ears on that. Yeah,
I mean, that is awesome. Yeah, like the other side of the stack would be the ingestion.
Yeah, so that's a good segue into something that was released literally today, is the ability to, and we've talked mostly, and this makes sense, right? Like because they live on the destination, they're transforming data that's already been ingested into RudderStack. We typically think about transformations with regards to those downstream tools, but with the addition of warehouse actions, and then even with this new webhook source, we now kind of have to consider, kind of like the example I showed Max of that interesting looking event from your warehouse that we made a little prettier in a transformation. We have the ability now where there's a lot of tools where we have customers that are ingesting data from a cloud source, from an ETL kind of action, but then there's other there's other types where they don't want to do it on like a batch, reach out and grab the data and sync it. But they want to be more reactive and have that data coming in real time. Because of the limitations up until now of the RudderStack API, we need a user ID or an anonymous ID to kind of fit roughly the RudderStack API structure to ingest those. But now we've got this idea of a custom source, so you can attach to a specific write key. You can just send any webhook that your heart so desires into RudderStack. And I'll show you. So this example, this is MailChimp. We don't have a MailChimp connector, but now when any action happens in MailChimp, you can select this is a test account, but you can put your RudderStack URL here and choose what you want sent to it, and all of a sudden those events are going to be coming in. They're gonna look like the following. There'll be a track event, just generic webhook source event, and then we'll just give them a randomly generated ID, and then we kind of will flatten out whatever properties are coming in that and this only supports post actions right now, but any of these are just going to be flattened kind of based on, and you can see this is going to look similar to what you're doing from a warehouse action, where it's not quite as pretty keys, but we can do whatever we want with this. So it's pretty nice to be able to, whether it's something like MailChimp, or even if you're trying to attach customer data from something like Stripe or Shopify or anything like that, you can now ingest that data into RudderStack in real time, and it's going to join just as an event stream. So, but as you can see, we mentioned this in conjunction with the idea of the transformations, because this is clearly going to need some work. There's not a lot of downstream tools that are going to be thrilled about this, and even our warehouse is not going to look great unless we're specifically designing it around this. But again, this is coming in just like anything else through RudderStack, just a JSON object, and so we can do what we need to do from there. And you can see kind of ways to pretty it up. We've got some sample transforms and kind of working on the docs around that. So yeah, man, that was
this
a great
would be a great combo with the metadata, right? Because that's a destination, a transformation you probably have on your warehouse destination, where you need to do this like logic of recursively going through event keys or something, which you really only, just for your own sanity, want to do on a very specific event source, which in this case would be that custom source, the webhook source, because otherwise, like, that saves you from testing a whole bunch of like use cases from like regular event streams that go in your warehouse that you don't need to check that way. Only do this weird stuff for the source.
Yeah, exactly. These are likely going to be very specific, hopefully. So at least. And then I know we're coming up on time, so I'll just hit on a couple things real quick. So I mentioned, and we won't go through this, it can be involved, but this is in our documentation. This is the docs for the API specifically for these transformations. So creating libraries, creating transformations, again, can all be done and sent via API, so that you can, instead of using the GUI that we showed, you can manage that, however makes your heart the happiest, and push that code. And then further, we have this GitHub action. And again, I won't go specifically through it because we're kind of close on time, but is a pretty cool tool, right? So it allows you to send these transformations and libraries even, and then again, we have some kind of baked in test events for them, but you can specify test input and expected output file, which again are just going to be JSON. And then, assuming these guys match up after you push your code, it'll automatically push and apply those via API. So this is a much clamored for feature that we've finally released, and pretty excited about it from our end.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just from a scalability perspective, to have that in your own repository and have it automatically test, so that especially when somebody with less JavaScript experience, shall we say, goes in and says, oh, it's an easy change, and then it like throws 8 errors, being like, well, not that easy to change.
Exactly. Yeah.
This because I mean that's the one, like, quote unquote downside of the transformations, is like that you can break your destination by accident if you just go in and you like add some code that is bad, or has like no pointer errors or something like that. Then that will not go anywhere after that. So this, especially with the testing combined, I can see is like very, very helpful feature.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Well, I think that's it. Anything else to add on to that, Max?
Not that I can think of.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm as mentioned on the RudderStack team, but Max, if you want to pitch yourself one more time, people know where to get you.
Yeah, obsessiveanalytics.com, or LinkedIn. You can find me if you want to nerd out about data engineering and the frustration that can come with that. Like, hit me up anytime.
Cool.
All right. Well, Max, Ryan, great session. Covered a ton of ground today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will follow up. If you register, we'll send out an email with a link to the session from today so you can go back through. Also, if you're interested or have more questions, please join the RudderStack Slack channel. You can get help from Ryan and his team, as well as just our kind of growing community of developers. And yeah, certainly follow along social media, everything. And we hope you'll join us next time. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.